a murderous stagecoach robbery, a Ming Dynasty invasion fleet, the pilgrimage of the dead. My guest and I discuss this and more on today's episode.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Hey guys, I have a fantastic interview coming up today, but first, I have released the Great Book of Random Tables. This takes a lot of my random tables geared for fantasy role-playing and puts them all together in a huge hardback book. You can find that only on drivethrurpg.com, and if you want the PDF, it's there as well. Just go to drivethrurpg, type in the Great Book of Random Tables, and you will find it. Again, it is 120 random tables geared to cut down your GM prep time so you can have more fun at the table. Now, today's interview. My guest today is the writer and game designer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks, Matt. Delighted to be here, as always.
Yes, absolutely. It is always fun to have you back on, and it is just a pleasure to talk history, folklore, literature, and see how we can use those situations and topics in our games. But now you have something really special coming up, don't you?
Yeah, so I am gearing up to run a Kickstarter in late 2021, date TBD, for my next game. And this is going to be a tabletop role-playing game called Shanty Hunters. And Shanty Hunters is a game set in the year 1880, where you play as sailors and scholars traveling the world's sea lanes to document the dying art of the sea shanty. Commercial sail is obsolete in the face of new steam technologies, and its majesty is fading from the world. And shanties, which are inextricably bound with sailing ships as opposed to steamships, shanties will surely vanish unless someone writes them down. But in Shanty Hunters, there's a wicked spirit that doesn't like it when shanties fall into the hands of landsmen, and it causes imagery and events from these sea shanties to manifest and oppose the player characters, threatening the very ships they sail aboard. And so you as the players need to use the text, the lyrics of the shanties that you are hearing and documenting, and my recommendation is singing around the table with your friends in your gaming group. Use these lyrics as your clues to anticipate what this wicked spirit is going to throw at you before it happens, and figure out how to react to the imagery and events from the shanties that it's manifesting once they've manifested, and figure out what you can do about it in order to save the very ship you sail aboard. I'm really excited about it. I think it's super cool. It's powered by the award-winning Gumshoe rules engine. And I think it's not quite like anything else on the market. So if you head over to moltensulfur.com/shanty-hunters, and I assume that will be in the show notes, you can read more about the game. I got a nice full write-up about what's in the book. And you can sign up for the mailing list, where I will let you know when the Kickstarter goes live. And of course, I will only use this mailing list to tell you about the Shanty Hunters Kickstarter. This isn't going to be used for any other thing. That's all it's for. So yeah, head over to that link and read more about Shanty Hunters. And if it scratches an itch you didn't know you had, you can sign up to be notified about the Kickstarter when it goes live.
Yeah, and that sounds super cool. And of course, yes, I will put a link in the show notes at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening can check that out over at Tristan's site and learn more about Shanty Hunters. All right. Now, Tristan, so you're a regular on the show, of course. And what we do is we talk about interesting situations that people can just throw right into their games and add weight to them by drawing from history and mythology and folklore. And so later on in the show, we are going to visit the Ming Dynasty and we're going to talk about the pilgrimage of the dead. But first, we have a stagecoach robbery that turned deadly. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So we're going to start off with this wild stagecoach robbery in 1796 France that became this this 1800s pop culture phenomenon. And I would compare it to something like D.B. Cooper or Charles Manson, where everybody just knows who these people are, even if they've never seen one of the 10,000 documentaries or true crime whatevers about D.B. Cooper or Charles Manson. Everybody knows who these people are. And this particular stagecoach robbery in 1796 occupied a very similar pop culture role in the 1800s. So in order to understand this stagecoach robbery, you first have to understand just a little bit about the mail system in France at this period. This is the French First Republic in the wake of the French Revolution, but before Napoleon turns France from a republic into a dictatorship. And the French First Republic has a postal system. It's got mail coaches going all over the country, running 24 hours a day. The mail coaches stop off at inns where there are horses waiting for them to swap out their horses and just keep on driving. So the mail runs very fast and very reliably because of these stopover points to swap out their horses. And they're carrying government orders and government shipments. They can also carry private packages. So if you are wealthy, because it's expensive, you can send a letter or a package by one of these mail stagecoaches. And they also sometimes carry passengers. Again, you have to have the money for it, and it's not a comfortable way to travel. But if you have the money and you need to get there tomorrow, these stagecoaches that never stop, except to change the horses, is probably the way to go. So we're in 1796 on May 26th, and we have a mail coach leaving Paris for Lyon. And this mail coach is carrying boxes of coin and paper money that collectively are worth 7 million francs. Now, it's hard to compare how much money is worth across the centuries. Comparisons kind of break down. But 7 million francs is a lot of money. We could just put that out there. And this coach, it has 2 drivers and a passenger. The passenger is a wine merchant. He's not carrying any luggage. That's not in and of itself unusual. He is carrying a cavalry saber, which is unusual and is worth remarking upon. So the coach leaves Paris. It arrives at its first stop at a little town called Montguerol, changes the horses there at the inn. The inn, of course, is also a restaurant, right? It's a tavern. It's an auberge. And there are 4 strangers dining at the inn, which is unusual, right? It's not a lot of strangers in any particular place in this period in time. And one of these strangers is distinctive. He's a tall, strapping blonde man who pays for the lunches of all 4 strangers. The coach continues on. It makes its next stop. It does not make the stop after that. The next morning, the police go and search for the missing coach. And what they find is, here's the coach driven off the side of the road. Here's the body of one of the drivers. He's had his arms held behind him while somebody slashed at him from the front. Oh, and there up the road, there's the body of the other driver. Oh, geez, he's missing a hand. And of the wine merchant, there is No evidence. The wine merchant has vanished into thin air. The police also find a spur near the scene of the crime. So presumably one of the attackers lost a spur. The spur just fell off his boot while during the fracas, however you pronounce that word. It's also worth noting, because the police are going to do some weird things during this story. It's worth noting that policing, as we would understand the concept, is very, very new during this time period. At this point, in fact, in the English-speaking world, there kind of isn't something that we would recognize as police. It's still very much in its infancy. The French have been experimenting with it for a little bit longer, but at certain points, you're going to say, like, wait, the police did what? Why on earth would they do that? It's because people are still figuring out the concept of policing as they're going along, just sort of inventing it from whole cloth. In any case, so the police are investigating. And what do they find? Hey, you know, the next inn, the one after Montgueron, same 4 strangers were observed there. And in fact, the landlady at that inn stitched a loose spur back onto the boot of one of the riders, a tall, strapping blonde man. And then the police get a report from Paris saying, hey, there was a guy who was spotted in Paris leading 4 horses that matched the description of the horses that the 4 strangers had at these 2 inns. And these horses were, when they were being led in Paris, they were all in a lather, as if they'd been riding hard. And the guy who was leading them was a guy named Etienne Courriol. The police, they rush to Courriol's house. He's not there. They track him to the house of a known fence, someone who receives stolen merchandise and resells it. This fence is a guy named Pierre Thomas Richard, and they track this Courriol, the guy with the horses, to the home of the fence. But Courriol is gone; he's already left. Nonetheless, the police arrest Richard, the fence. They arrest his servant, and they arrest a man who happened to be at the home of the fence when they arrived, a guy named Charles Guillaume. The police look everything over. They quickly conclude, this Charles Guillaume guy, the guest at the house, he is not part of this murder robbery. Let him go. They did, however, take his identification papers from him in the course of this, and they told him, all right, come down to the courthouse in a week and pick up your identification papers. Okay. The police are able to track Courriol, the man with the horses. They're able to track him down to a town 60 miles outside Paris. They arrest him. They also arrest his lover, who is with him, a woman named Madeleine Prébon. The 2 of them have over 1 million francs on them, right? So, hey, sir, where did you get this 1 million francs? Like, I found it. Clearly, Monsieur Courriol is connected to this murder, this murder robbery. Now we get to the part that everybody in the 1800s, in the 19th century, in pop culture was so interested about, as we introduce another character. And I'm going slow, and I'm trying to differentiate between these characters because there are a lot of people in this story, and they all have very French names, and I'm trying to make them seem distinct so that we can follow this story. So this guy we're introducing here is a guy named Joseph Le Surq. Le Surq is a retired sergeant from the French army who made a couple of lucky investments and was now quite wealthy. Despite his wealth, despite his high station, he was a friend of the fence, Richard, and of the guest at the fence's house, Mr. Charles Guillaume. And as Mr. Guillaume is walking down to the courthouse to pick up his identification papers that the police had seized from him, he bumps into his friend. He bumps into Monsieur Le Surq. Le Surq is a tall, strapping, blonde man. And Le Surq says to his friend, hey, you're going to the courthouse to pick up your papers. Well, we're friends. Like, I'll come with you for moral support, because nobody wants to go to talk to the police alone. So they go to the courthouse, and they're waiting for the identification papers to be returned. And who else happens to be in the courthouse but 2 barmaids from the inn in Montgueron who are there to give their testimony. Honestly, right hand to God, sir, I saw these 4 strangers. They were in the inn. One of them was a tall, strapping blonde man. Hey, wait a minute. That's him over there sitting on that bench. That tall, strapping blonde man sitting next to the guy who's getting his identification papers back. That's him. That's the guy who paid for everybody's lunch. So the police rush out and they arrest both of them. They arrest tall, strapping blonde Le Surc, and they arrest Charles Guillaume because, we thought you weren't really connected to this. Clearly, you're much more connected than we realized. So they arrest both of them. And everybody goes to trial. And at the trial, Le Surc, the tall, strapping blonde man, he's very confident he's going to be acquitted. Admittedly, there is evidence against him. Remember Courriol, the man with the horses? Remember his lover who he was with and had the 1,000,000 francs with? She turned state's evidence. She was appearing on the stand and saying, yes, here's what I know. Here's who was involved in the murder robbery. And she went on the stand to say, yeah, that Monsieur Le Surc over there, that's the guy. That's the guy who was one of the robbers and paid for everybody's lunch. And yes, the landlady who stitched the fallen spur back onto that boot says, oh yeah, this tall blonde guy, Le Surc, that's the guy whose boot I sewed the spur back onto. But Le Surc had a bunch of witnesses to testify to his whereabouts, so he had a good alibi. And he had, witnesses for every part of the day during that day and for the days on either side, and very well alibied, if that's a word. But one of the witnesses ruins his whole case. One of the witnesses is this jeweler who produces a sales report with Le Surc's name on it and a date and information about a sale to say, look, he was clearly in my shop because here's my sales report on the day in question. But the sales report was a forgery. And it wasn't even a good forgery. It was a bad forgery. Someone had taken a real sales report from that day for Le Surc and just changed one of the digits. He wrote an 8 on top of a 9 to change the date on which the sale occurred. And even did it in different ink, right? So clearly this is a forgery and it's a bad forgery. And so the judge is having none of it. The judge in the case says, you know what? It says to the jury, if this witness is a fake, you should probably treat the rest of his witnesses as if they're fakes too. This guy's rich. He can buy off anybody he wants. He's clearly just bought all these witnesses to testify to his alibi. And the jury bought it. The jury accepted what the judge said, and Le Surc was sentenced to die, as were most of the other people involved in this case so far. Courriol. Remember Courriol, the guy with the horses who ran off with the 1,000,000 francs and his lover? At this point, after he too is convicted and sentenced to die, he admits his guilt, but declares publicly that Le Surc, the tall, strapping blonde man, is innocent, entirely innocent, had nothing to do with it. And in fact, here are 4 other people. Here are the names of 4 other people who were actually in on it with me, in on the murder robbery. And one of these men, in point of fact, is tall and strapping and always wears a blonde wig. And that's who everybody who fingered Le Surc and said they saw Le Surc, they actually saw this other guy. It wasn't Le Surc. Anyway, all these guys go to the scaffold. They are executed by guillotine, with the exception of Courriol's lover, who I believe gets 10 years, and Richard, the fence, who gets sentenced to hard labor for 20 some odd years. He does not get executed. And Le Surc goes to the guillotine proclaiming his innocence. It's all very dramatic. No, I'm falsely convicted. So numbers. At this point, we have 4 people executed. They are Le Surc, the tall, strapping blonde man, Courriol, the man with the horses, Guillaume, the friend of Le Surc and the fence, and the servant of the fence. All 4 of them are dead. Well, how many robbers were there? Well, there were the 4 strangers in the inn, and there was the wine merchant, who was probably a plant. So we've got 5 robbers and 4 people executed for murder. And now we have these 4 additional leads that Guillaume has provided. So the French police have to chase down these 4 additional leads. And I'm going to kind of gloss over some of these guys. One of them turns out to be the fake wine merchant. And before he is executed, he declares that the robbers knew which coach to hit because they had a contact inside the postal system. Second guy manages to escape before the trial, but is recaptured and executed. A lot of prison escapes in this story, by the way. This won't be the last one. The third one flees Paris for Lyon, then for Italy, then for Spain. In Spain, he's arrested on a completely unrelated charge. He is extradited back to France and executed as well. So now we're up to 7 executions for a 5-man crime. This last guy, shortly before he's executed, makes a confession to a priest declaring that Le Turc is innocent, but requests that this confession not be made public until 6 months after the execution. Not clear why. We just, to this day, we don't know why he requested the 6-month delay. So 7 people executed for a 5-person crime. And 2 of them go to the guillotine. 3 of them go to the guillotine proclaiming that Le Turc is innocent. Now we get our 4th guy. Our 4th guy is a man named Jean-Guillaume Dubusk. And Dubusk is the tall, strapping man who wears the blonde wig. Dubusk does not have to be arrested. He is already in prison. By the time the authorities find him, they find him in a prison where he has already been because he is in prison for another crime. He's a professional cat burglar most of the time. He and his lover, who is also in the prison for another crime, he and his lover try to escape the prison. They successfully escape the prison. Well done. But Dubusk suffers a long fall in the process, breaks his leg. They're not able to get away. Like, they get outside the prison, but the night patrol rolls him up because Dubusk can't really go anywhere because he has a broken leg. And back to prison they go. They now can't be transported to trial for the murder robbery because he has a broken leg. He can't travel. So he is convalescing in the prison, and he manages to drag out his convalescence for 6 months, which is a long time to convalesce for a broken leg. He manages to convince the prison doctor that, oh no, in order, for best recuperation, I really should have my lover with me. So they're both in this very nice cell because they get a cell with a fireplace so they can keep warm during the convalescence. And at about the 6-month mark, they take all the bricks out of the back of the fireplace and escape through the hole they made, and they are gone. And the French police have no idea where they've gone, and they are just gone for 2 years. 2 years. Fast forward 2 years. The police recaptured Dubusk and his lover. His lover is a woman named Barrière. Forget her first name. I have this somewhere. Claudine Barrière. Anyway, so they the police finally roll up Dubusk and Barrière. In the couple's house, they find disguises, burglary tools, and 8 forged letters of identification. But they got him. And he's well enough to travel, so they can finally bring him to court. And they try him, on real thin evidence, because the court trots out all the people who identified Le Turc in the first place. They trot out 6 police officers. They trot out the barmaids. They trot out 9 witnesses. And all of them, to a man, say, yeah, that's not him. Like, this guy standing here in the blonde wig, like, that's not the guy I saw. The guy I saw was Le Turc, the guy who was already executed, the guy who was already guillotined. Like, that's not him. That's some other guy. It does look similar, but I would never make that mistake. And the 2 witnesses who say, oh, it was Dubusk. It wasn't Le Turc, it was Dubusk. Those 2 witnesses are dead. They were executed, so they can hardly testify. So instead, the prosecution has to break out written statements from them from before they were executed to say, oh, it really was Dubusk. And ultimately, Dubusk is convicted not of participating in the robbery, but of abetting it. somehow. It's not entirely clear how he helped the robbery, but the jury says he definitely helped somehow. So to the guillotine with him. And Dubusk is guillotined. His lover, Barrière, gets 10 years. So now we have 8 men executed for a 5-man crime. This is getting increasingly ridiculous. Not all these men were convicted of murder. And in fact, the French government has to publish a statement reminding the public that the convictions of Les Turcs and Dubusk are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They weren't technically convicted of the exact same crime. It is possible that Les Turcs was the tall, strapping blonde man and that Dubusk helped in some other way. But really, I mean, honestly, like, they're both dragged into the court for being the tall, strapping blonde man. So what the hell, you guys? The Ministry of Interior has to remove graffiti from Les Turcs' tomb, complaining about the gross miscarriage of justice and all this stuff. And the pop culture of the era just seizes on this. There's a bunch of novels and plays, all talking about the ways in which Les Turcs was unjustly executed, and how Dubusk, the man in the wig, was the real tall, strapping blonde man who paid for everyone's lunch. And the kind of the biggest version of the pop culture was this play in Victorian Britain that became this long-running hit, where the same famous actor played both Les Turcs and Dubusk. So the two characters, the two tall, strapping blonde men, never actually appear on stage at the same time because it's the same actor playing both of them. And, it has this long tail that it persists. I've found references of the case in pop culture going as far to the right as 1963 in an Asterix comic book. So the fundamental question that we must ask ourselves from a gaming perspective is, was Les Turcs actually involved in the robbery? Of course, if he wasn't involved in the robbery, he was definitely keeping weird company, right? He's a wealthy man, but he's maintaining friendships with this fence and with all these other guys. And you have all these witnesses who seem real sure that Les Turcs and not Dubusk was the meal-buying stranger. But on the other hand, they've all also got their reputation on the line, right? Like, they stood up in court and they did whatever the French Republican equivalent of raising your right hand is, and said, yes, it really was Les Turcs. So it would look really bad if they then later went back and said, now that you mention, I guess maybe it was this Dubusk fellow. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, widow Les Turcs. I'm really sorry I had your husband executed, right? Nobody wants to look like that. Yeah. So, and just an ice cherry on top, after Les Turcs was executed, remember, he was wealthy, all of his property was seized by the state. So the state definitely had an incentive to want to convict him. On the other hand, what if he was involved in the crime? And this is where things get great from a gaming perspective, right? If you want to run an adventure at your table based on this mystery, if Les Turcs was involved in the crime, what was his role? Because it's unclear. It's unclear to us in a historical perspective what his role was, if in fact he was involved. But nonetheless, he's super important to the crime, right? If it weren't for Les Turcs having been falsely, perhaps in scare quotes, convicted, Courriol would never have fingered those 4 other guys, right? And he's the central focus of the whole thing. And this is your opportunity as a GM to make Les Turcs' role whatever is convenient for your campaign setting, right? So if you are running a Lovecraftian game, cool. Les Turcs is a cultist. He needs the 7 million francs to do something terrible with them. What if you're running a psionics game? Cool. Les Turcs is a mutant, and he is one of the robbers, and he is there to defeat the coach's mental defenses. What if you're running a space opera? Les Turcs is the guy who loans the robbers his fancy ship. He's wealthy enough to have a fancy ship that can overtake the speedy messenger ship in exchange for a cut of the profits, right? So whatever, Le Cirque is integral to the whole story, but you can make him whatever you want him to be. And my strong recommendation is make him something that gets right at the heart of what makes your fictional campaign setting special, right? That's how you make this adventure not feel like some weird stagecoach robbery in 1796 France. That's how you make it feel like a Call of Cthulhu adventure or something, is you dump all of your Lovecraftian elements right into Le Cirque. Okay, I've been talking for a long time. I've completely lost track of time. I'm going to stop to breathe.
All right, Tristan. Yeah, thank you for setting that all up. And that was a big setup there, and a lot of French names. A lot of French names. But yeah, thank you for doing that. And I can totally see where you're going with the idea that you can use this kind of in whatever setting that somebody may be playing. And just to be kind of clear, so your idea is to kind of go in on, if I can say his name, Le Cirque.
Le Cirque, sure.
Le Cirque. Your idea is to go in on him and use him as kind of the focal point, right?
Yes. I am not necessarily saying you have to make him guilty, right? There's a lot of fun stuff we can talk about, how can we make this a cool adventure if Le Cirque is innocent? But yeah, and the reason I would say make him the focal point is we already know from our experience of 19th century pop culture that people gravitate to the Le Cirque story, right? Yeah. We already know that people have historically found it exciting. So cool. Like, I don't know about you, Matt, but as a DM, I often come to the table saying, okay, I have this idea. I think it's really cool. Let's see if anybody else thinks it's really cool. If they don't, oh geez, I hope I can improv an entire session. But here we already know that other people find this Le Cirque business cool because they spent 100 years making plays and novels about it.
Yeah. And of course there is always something with, somebody who's perhaps innocent. And it certainly doesn't hurt that if they're wealthy, those are some elements that I think that, have kind of lend themselves to people being interested. If you look at true crime and stories like that, if there's a question that somebody could be innocent, that's exciting. If somebody's wealthy, that's exciting. I don't know exactly why that is. If it's just our draw to celebrity or whatever it is, but it's just like if somebody happens to be wealthy, that seems to be a draw, because maybe like why would he have to rob the you're blaming a guy who doesn't have to rob a stagecoach, right? He's already wealthy, if that just kind of throws in some of those questions. So I think you're right that it does have these elements that we already know that people could be, interested in that and be kind of, drawn to that to see, it's like, let's figure out if he's guilty. Let's figure out if he's innocent, or, and why are the police just deciding to convict another man for basically the same crime? If the other guy was certainly guilty, and, they confiscated all that rich guy's property that was like maybe right next to Versailles or something, who knows? But it's just like, why are they doing all that stuff?
One additional detail, sorry, that completely slipped my mind, but is excellent, and I have to mention. Remember the fence, Richard?
Yeah.
Who got sent to hard penal servitude. So he got dragged out of the galleys. In fact, if you've seen any variation on Les Mis, it's the same galley. It's the awful hard servitude place where they keep Jean Valjean. He's in that one. He's in that prison. So they drag him out of there to testify in the Dubusk trial. He is the one living person who is able to say, "Yep, it was Dubusk. Boy, it sure was that guy." All right, so he testifies. and then he is brought back to prison. Along the way, he escapes, right? We already have a gazillion prison escapes. Here's our best one yet, because along the way he escapes, and he's never caught again. He disappears into the mists of history. Nobody knows what happens to Richard. Good luck, buddy. So I think that's a delightful little touch there.
Yeah. I mean, this situation, you could go like a million ways with this thing. Like, you could have the player characters working for the police. You could have them working to prove somebody's innocence. You could have them just wrapped up in all of these prison escapes. You can do all kinds of stuff like this. You could even have them fingered in the crime if you wanted to, I guess, because it looks like the police, we'll put police in quotes, I guess, because they just seem to be like they're kind of roping everybody into it.
With regards to one of the players PCs getting wrapped up in it, I was telling my wife about this, and her brilliant idea was, okay, make Le Surc one of the PCs, right? Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. I will guarantee you one of your PCs is mixed up in some shady business, right? There is always a PC in your party who is involved in something of questionable legality. Mm-hmm. Cool. Somebody who looks just like that PC committed a crime, and it's someone who has friends in common with the PCs. And now all of a sudden, sorry, Mr. Bard, sorry, Mr. Rogue, but you are a tiefling with 3 horns, and a tiefling with 3 horns was definitely spotted at 2 inns and had his spur stitched back on him before whatever the D&D equivalent of a stagecoach robbery is. It's honestly probably a stagecoach robbery. And now the police say it's definitely you, and here we have all these witnesses, and what can you do about it? So I think that's a great way to do it, is make one of the PCs Le Surc. That's a sure way to make sure they have skin in the game. And
just like you said, the hook there is really easy, because if your player characters are involved with some shady characters, one of those NPCs that they care about is just like, hey, I need to go to the authorities and collect some of my papers. Do you want to come along with me?
Well, yeah, of course I'll come with you, friend.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, why not? And they go and they get fingered for the crime. That would be, I think that would be a great hook right there.
I definitely agree. And actually, one more hook that I will stop talking about this at least, is 7 million francs went missing. Courriol and his lover, Madeleine Prébon, had a little over 1 million francs on them when they were arrested. Mm-hmm. Where's the other 5.5 million francs? There is presumably a treasure out there. And if your PCs, maybe they're not working with the police, but if they can beat the police to solving the crime, presumably solving the crime for realsies, as opposed to like, hey, we executed 8 people. Probably some of them were guilty. If you for realsies solve the crime, presumably you also find where those 5.5 million francs are. And that is incentive enough for most parties.
Yeah. And actually, that reminds me, we probably should stop talking about this, but it kind of reminds me of a hook that I've always wanted to do, and I haven't done it yet, is where there's a treasure out there, from some robbery or something like that, a lot of treasure, and there is somebody who is connected to the crime that's in prison. I had always thought that sneaking into the prison to get the information on where the treasure is buried from that one convict or whatever. I always thought that would be a really cool hook.
As sort of a reverse Count of Monte Cristo.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you need to break into prison to find the guy who knows where the treasure's hidden. And so, and then what you do with him or her, from that point, who knows, right? Do they want to tell you? Do they know? It's just like you're acting on a hunch to get some kind of fabulously, wealthy treasure. And I always thought that would be a pretty cool hook, to make them break into a prison secretly and get the information to get a treasure. I always thought that would be good.
That does sound like a good time.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe I'll I'll throw that in. Although I'm taking a little break from GMing right now. I'm getting to play, which is awesome.
Oh,
so
what you playing?
We're playing 5e. Well, actually, we're playing 2 games, I should say. We're playing 5e, kind of a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting that one of my friends has created. So I'm playing a fighter who I've multi-classed into Bard a little bit. And he is, since it's like a post-apocalyptic, he's like an uplifted gorilla. So he's like kind of Planet of the Apes kind of thing. So he's a big, huge fighter, was a gladiator, but now I've multi-classed him into Bard a little bit. So he is a ton of fun to play. And then actually, some friends in our gaming group just really wanted to do some Star Trek because they've been doing some rewatching of the series. So a friend graciously decided to step up and is running us through a Star Trek game. So I am captain of an enterprise that is about about 120 years beyond Jean-Luc Picard into the future. So that is a lot of fun.
Oh, what a delight.
Yeah, as well. So taking a little break from GMing, but I will probably be GMing again within a couple months, which is usually a long enough break for me, so I can get back into it a little bit. But so that is what I am doing right now. But we should probably, if we're sticking to the format or just throwing that to the wind, we probably should head over to the Ming Dynasty so people can use a cool situation from there in their games.
Sure. So some of you, many in the audience, are probably at least tangentially familiar with the Ming Dynasty diplomat / explorer / admiral Zheng He, and it's spelled usually anglicized to a spelling that looks kind of like Zheng He. So if you learned about a Zheng He in your 9th grade world history class or whatever, we're talking about that guy. So there's a particular incident in one of the travels of Zheng He that is just a remarkable template for a short alien invasion adventure. And I say adventure, right? Because that sounds like a campaign, right? That sounds like something where everybody agrees, okay, we're going to spend 6 months playing an alien invasion campaign. Mm-hmm. That is not what I'm talking about. This is legitimately a template for a short adventure in an ongoing campaign that comes in out of the blue, does some cool stuff, and then gets out before it overstays its welcome, and you are on to do cool stuff. So I think it's great. I think it's an amazing template. Let's talk about it. So this is all occurring in the early 1400s. The invasion itself is in 1410. And our protagonist in the story, Zheng He, is a eunuch in the service of the imperial court of China, of the Ming Dynasty. He originally worked for the uncle of the second emperor of the Ming Dynasty, but the uncle overthrew his nephew and became the third Ming emperor, and Zheng was a real big help in that, right? Like, he was one of those trusted fire and forget weapons that you could be like, Zheng, I need this thing to happen, just go make it happen. And Zheng's just like, you got it, boss, and off he goes. And so as a reward for the skillful service, without which his master probably would not have become the third Ming emperor, Zheng is assigned new duties as the admiral of a treasure fleet that the new emperor wants to send to the ports of Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. And this treasure fleet is enormous. We are talking about wooden vessels that really stretch the limits of size that it is possible to build out of wood. There is an upper limit above which you really cannot build a vessel out of wooden planks. It doesn't work structurally anymore. These ships were probably pushing that upper limit. And there were about 60 of the big ones, with God knows how many little ones in support. I estimated in the post about 200. We're looking at a total crew of almost 28,000, mostly professional soldiers. And in terms of manpower and weight of wood, this fleet is comparable to the combined total at both sides at the Battle of Trafalgar 400 years later, generally recognized as one of the greatest naval engagements in human history. This treasure fleet is equivalent to both sides in the Battle of Trafalgar mushed together and then sent forth into the world. Now, why, right? Like, why build an enormous fleet and then go send it into the Indian Ocean from China? We would kind of instinctively say, oh, it was surely exploration. Nope, wasn't exploration. The Chinese were already very familiar with Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean. They have maps from the period, like you can see the east coast of Africa on the maps. Like, they know all this stuff. The Chinese at the time are not super duper into trading, but they are doing trading in the Indian Ocean, and they are absolutely trading with people who are trading in the Indian Ocean. So they don't need to discover this, right? Like, this is like somebody in New York City discovering San Diego. Yeah, man, we already know about San Diego. So, okay, well then surely it's trade. Like, this is going for commercial purposes. Nope, they're not doing trading. Like, that's not there. Well, then it must be for some military purpose. Not really. They do a little bit of military stuff, but that's not it. Really, the reason why they're doing it is to induct all of the states of Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean into the Chinese tribute system. It is an important part of how the various Chinese emperors kind of interact with the broader world, that China is the center of the world, that China is the middle kingdom, China is the center of the world revolves around China. And the way that works is other states send gifts and ambassadors to the court of the emperor, who then says, oh, thank you for these gifts. Thank you for the ambassadors. Isn't it lovely that we're all friends? Here, have some gifts of your own. And Omni Domni, by the power vested in me, by being the son of heaven, I declare that the state that you represent, ambassador, is legitimate, right? That you're the king of your kingdom is in fact the legitimate king. I have the power to say it. Behold, it is so. And you have all these states that the Chinese know about that are not part of this tribute system. And so Genghi's job was to go out there and get them into the tribute system. So what you have is this enormous fleet, crewed mostly by soldiers who collectively there's probably more soldiers on those ships than there are in the entire kingdom that the fleet is pulling into. The fleet, just out of nowhere with no warning, arrives in a port in India, in Southeast Asia, on the eastern coast of Africa, and says, behold, here's some presents for you. We're going to need presents from you. We're going to need a couple of noble-born ambassadors. Don't worry, the next time we're by this way, we'll drop them back off. So as you might imagine, this could be a bit of a shock for the good people of the Indian Ocean when this just arrives out of absolutely nowhere. The first time that this fleet arrives on the island of Ceylon. So actually, backing up here, the island of Ceylon is today, it is the nation of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is the name of the country. Ceylon is the island that happens to have identical borders to the country of Sri Lanka, but the island is Ceylon. And most of Ceylon at this point is part of a kingdom called Khat. And Khat is a little unusual in the Indian Ocean world. For one, it's Buddhist. Most of the states of the Indian Ocean are either Hindu or Muslim. In India, you have plenty of Hindu kingdoms and plenty of Muslim kingdoms. And then in the rest of the Indian Ocean, you just have a lot of Muslim kingdoms. And also, all these nations in the Indian Ocean are doing brisk trade with one another. And most of this trade is being done by Muslims. And they're just trading all over the place, and there's constant contact among all these states, and they're all in very close communication with each other. Ceylon and the Kingdom of Khat aren't really part of that. They aren't really part of the cultural zeitgeist of the Indian Ocean. They're not part of the trading milieu. They are Buddhist, and their primary contribution to the trading milieu is that they are pirates. They send pirate ships out to go raid the trading fleet. So anyway, here comes Zheng He with this enormous fleet, and he drops anchor off the kingdom of Kot and says, hello, here are some gifts. I need gifts and ambassador. The king of Kot basically tells him to go pound sand. I'm not interested in this. Buzz off. And okay, all right, but I'll be back. That's in the first voyage. In his third voyage, probably in 1410, he returns to Kot. And the king of Kot, a man named Alakashvara, sees this as an opportunity. And he provokes Zheng. My guess is he's given him a little along the lines of like, if you want me to send tribute to your emperor so much, why don't you come over here and make me, right? Well, Zheng He is happy to take him up on that offer, so he disembarks this enormous force of soldiers and starts marching inland towards the capital of Kot. But this is, of course, what Alakashvara, the king of Kot, wanted. And Alakashvara sends his own army down to the beach. And they're on the beach, and there's these unprotected, now largely unmanned vessels full of, 10,000 treasures from 10,000 ports and from Ming China itself. And Alakashvara sends a message down to Zheng. Says, hey, buddy, tell you what, I could, if I wanted to, just sack all your ships, right? Like, they're right there. They're undefended. I've got my men down there on the beach. I could just steal everything on those ships and burn the ships. I'm not going to do that, though. I'm going to make you a real nice offer. How about you just give me a bunch of money and I'll take my guys back. Don't even try running down to the beach. My guys are already there, right? They'll be able to sack and burn your ships before you even get there. There's nothing you can do. Zheng says, okay, all right. And he does exactly the opposite of that. Instead of marching back down to the beach, he continues marching inland. And he arrives at the capital because he knows the army is down on the beach. The army is not guarding the capital. It's not anywhere near the capital. So he arrives at the capital, which is completely undefended, takes it completely by surprise, is able to breach the walls before anybody realizes what's going on. And now he's in the capital. And he arrests King Alakashvara. He arrests the entire royal family. He arrests the court of the king of Kot, and then turns around and fortifies the walls. So when the army of Kot rushes back to the capital, they don't even have time to even try to sack the treasure fleet, right? Like, they have to save the king. So they're rushing back to the capital, but Zheng He is inside the walls. He has the high ground, right? He has the walls. And so the army of Kot just like washes up upon the walls, but it does nothing more than the sea washing up on a seawall. And Zheng just trashes them and says, okay, cool. Well, King Alakashvara and your family and your court, you're all coming with me back to China. That will teach you. So he just leaves. He just leaves like, hey, thank you very much. Good people of Ceylon. You are not particularly tied into the Indian Ocean trading network. Most of the peasants out there in the fields don't even know that there is such a thing as China. I just arrived completely out of the blue from a place you've never even heard of with an army that trounced your army, just marched through all of your fields, took your capital, stole your king and his entire court, and now I'm gone. Goodbye. Anyway, goodbye. And he gets on his ships and he leaves. What? And he brings him back to China. And the Ming emperor, who is, of course, good buddies with Zheng, in his infinite mercy says, okay, listen, King Alakashvara, I get it. You didn't really know very much about China. You didn't realize that you were doing a terrible, terrible thing by attempting to extort an emissary of me, the Emperor of China. Awful, awful thing for you to do, but you didn't know, right? You're just an ignorant barbarian from a terrible backwater place. And I forgive you because I'm just so merciful. But I'm very sorry. You can't be king anymore, right? Like that bit, like, we can't have kings running around doing this. So you don't get to be king of Kot anymore. But hey, I notice your entire family is here. So I turn to you, my imperial administration, the bureaucrats who do the actual day-to-day running of China. You guys pick one of these Kot people. Pick one of them to be the next king of Kot. And then my good buddy Zheng, the next time, or I guess he would have said my good buddy He, because Zheng is the family name. As a total aside, interestingly, it wasn't his original family name. His original family name was Ma, which is to this day a Muslim last name in China. Zheng He was born Ma He. He was born a Muslim, but later converted to Buddhism. Anyway, my good buddy He return to Kot, delivered unto the people of Kot their new king, and also deliver unto them this Alakashvara guy who, didn't really know any better but can't be a king. So anyway, off the treasure fleet goes, back to Kot. And they pull in, and what do they find? Hey, wait a minute. Things haven't remained stagnant in our absence. Of course there's a new king. And it gets better because it turns out King Alakashvara was a usurper. He wasn't the original king. He was from a family that had married into the original royal family of Kot. And for a while, Alakashvara ruled as the puppet master behind the scenes, manipulating a puppet king. And at a certain point, he just took the throne for himself. So the original royal family is still there. They weren't arrested. Alakashvara's family was arrested. So they just stepped right into the void. They're like, all right, we're back, everybody. Like, boy, good thing that stupid Alakashvara family is gone. Ugh, we hated them, didn't we? So they're all sitting on the throne. And they're like, oh, hey, it's you guys again. How you doing? And Zheng He just drops the Alakashvara people off on the beach, says, good luck with that, and sails off. And now what we have is a three-way political dispute. We have the original royal family, which has taken their throne back. We have Alakashvara's relative, who was appointed by the emperor, or by the imperial bureaucracy anyway, to be the new king of Kot. And we have Alakashvara, who, of course, is not going to be demoted just because some foreign barbarian emperor told him he was demoted. So now we have a three-way dispute between all these good people here in Kot about who gets to be king. And ultimately, neither of the two Alakashvara family contenders are able to muster enough support, and the original royal family gets to keep their throne, and that's that. And so from a gaming perspective, I love the out of the blue aspect of this, right? You can be doing the campaign you're already doing, right? Because there's so much in like the RPG internet of people like, wouldn't it be great to have a campaign about X? Like, yeah, it would be great, but I already have a campaign. I've been running it for a while now. I don't need material for a new campaign. I need material for the campaign I'm already running. So you take the campaign you're already running, and this provides you a template for having this enormous force that nobody ever knew about just arrive suddenly in your setting and engage in some very important aspect of the setting. In this case, it's politics. But if your setting is all about magic, then they engage with the magic and they change something about the magic in some big way. And then they just leave. They just say, okay, my work here is done. And they just disappear and they're gone. And what you get to do as a GM is have this short adventure. It doesn't overstay its welcome. The PCs get to engage with whatever these new arrivals are doing. If they're trying to engage with the politics, the PCs get to decide, on which side they want to do the politics and, try to fight them or try to fight the invaders or help the invaders. If they're doing something to continue with this magic example I just made up, if the invaders are changing something fundamental about the way magic works in the setting, the PCs get to decide, okay, are we going to help this? Are we going to fight this? Do we need to go into some long lost dungeon and find the great MacGuffin that we can use to help or to hinder? Engage with it in some way. And then as soon as the players have engaged with everything that's interesting about this premise, the invaders just go. Like, that's it. We're gone. We're done here. We go home. And actually, I glossed over one little thing that I'd like to return back to, which is there's no real historical evidence that this occurred. But nonetheless, there is a popular legend that remains repeated in Sri Lanka that Zheng He was there. Yes, to do some weird arbitrary politics stuff, but primarily to steal the most sacred relic in Ceylon. A relic that is still in Ceylon and is super duper 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 important. And it's the tooth of the Buddha, the tooth of the Buddha, the guy himself, his tooth. is in a temple in Sri Lanka. And the idea is that Zheng He was trying to steal the tooth of the Buddha, and that's why he was really there. Again, there's no actual evidence to support that this idea is legitimate. It doesn't even make a lot of sense because Zheng He was himself Buddhist and was a convert to Buddhism, and thus there's even the possibility that he had the zeal that we typically associate with converts to a religion. But what this then, from a template perspective, from a gaming perspective, lets us do is say, hey, if you want to, you can even fold a secondary thing into this, right? Like you have these guys appearing out of nowhere, and they're after cool thing involving my setting A, but then as a secondary goal, they're also after cool thing involving my setting B. And that gives you just another hook to play with. They're not just here for the politics, they're also here for the tooth of the Buddha. And yeah, I think that this whole Zheng He in Cot story is amazing, and I think it is super duper gameable.
Yeah, and while I was reading the post on your site, I was really kind of interesting. Although, I mean, Zheng He is very interesting in and of himself. He has a lot of stories, I believe, about him in that as well. So I really enjoyed learning about this one. I was thinking, though, I mean, I do like the idea of something that's kind of like showing up out of the blue, but sometimes I think that can feel like, oh yeah. The game master just wanted to throw something at us to really complicate things. How do we make it feel kind of organic part of the world, like this was just an organic part of the world, because here is this trading fleet that is out there and they're going to stop at every place along the way at some point. How do we make it feel kind of real and organic, as opposed to just like, oh well, the game master, he was just was just kind of like, yeah, he was like, oh, they're not being challenged enough, I'm going to throw something out of left field at them, and it just made up on the spot or something like that.
So the way to do that, and in my opinion anyway, is foreshadowing, which is, as the PCs are traveling around, they hear people mentioning this great invading force. So to continue with historical examples, they're traveling around Kot and they are meeting a pirate for whatever reason. They were already, right? Like, this isn't something you shoehorn in. They were already going to meet this pirate in their adventure. And the pirate, unlike most people in Kot, the pirate is engaging with the outside world. And the pirate says like, oh man, boy, you're interested in the helm of Bloogity Bloog, but let me tell you, there is a power out there far greater than the helm of Bloogity Bloog. Have you heard about this Zheng He guy? Boy, he is something. And so you kind of drop that in there, and then in the next adventure, the PCs encounter some wild bit of treasure that's completely unlike anything they've ever seen before. And they're like, man, what is this? Where did this come from? And it's like, oh, I bought this from a guy who says that he got it from a guy who got it from the court at Hormuz, where it was offered as a present by this Zheng He guy. Like, how wild, huh? The downside to that, of course, is it requires the GM to know well in advance what he is going to do. And that can be tricky. So right now, for example, I'm running an Ultraviolet Grasslands campaign. It's an enormous amount of fun. We're all having a great time. Ultraviolet Grasslands, for the folks at home who don't know, is a really cool kind of OSR fantasy setting, in scare quotes, that is kind of psychedelic metal meets Marco Polo. And the PCs are a caravan on this endless steppe, and they're traveling west across this endless steppe. And it's weird when they start, and the further west they go, the weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder it gets. And because this is what I'm running, to a certain extent, I know where the PCs are going to go, right? Because that's the premise of the campaign. They're going to go west. So if I wanted to drop something like this in the setting, I could say to myself, hey, look, they're going to encounter something I'm going to base on Zheng He when they reach, the citadel of the spectrum satraps. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop in some hints along the way that says, boy, there's something going on at the citadel of the spectrum satraps. But from a zero prep game master perspective, title drop, from a zero prep GM perspective, foreshadowing is a lot harder because the whole point is you don't know what's going to happen, what the PCs are going to encounter 5 sessions before they encounter it. You don't even know what they're going to encounter today because you haven't prepped it. Mm-hmm. And I would be very curious to hear your perspective as a no prep GM, how you would handle something like this.
Yeah, what I would do is, I would throw it in there. And I would let my players and stuff talk about, Matt had a busy day today and he couldn't think of stuff and he thought he was being easy on us and he wanted to throw this thing out of nowhere. And then what I would do is I would reveal kind of the bigger story a little bit later as the kind of like the larger world. Like they then discover a few things and realize that, the kingdom we were in was actually an isolated kingdom. And there's been these things going on in the larger world around us, and they've just gotten here. And so like the thing is like to give, the army or whatever it is that that invades, when the players start looking into it, give that weight on the outside of where it was and make sure that it looks like it has been there always operating. It just took them, it was just showing up here, kind of out of the blue for this place, but in other places it was already there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes a huge amount of sense. If you can't foreshadow because you genuinely don't know where this is going, then I know this isn't a word, but you backshadow it.
Yeah.
You retroactively fold it into the canon of the setting. And when you have opportunities, when you have little windows onto the larger vista of the setting, you make sure you put things in that window that are reminiscent of that stunt you pulled a couple of weeks back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then also too, like using random tables or other things that I would use in my no prep game, say maybe at 2 stop off points, maybe characters in a dungeon or 2 or in a palace when they were searching something, say they found a coin from a foreign land. And then say in another one, they found a key with foreign writing inscribed on it. Well, I didn't let them know what that was. And I didn't know what that was at the time. But now that I've introduced this foreign army, I'll say, that was their writing on there. You see all this writing, on the banners of this marching in army. And that matches that coin and that key. And then people are like, oh my gosh, you foreshadowed this. And I'm just over here laughing as I eat my Doritos or whatever.
Yes, I definitely knew this was going to happen. That's really smart, actually. I don't do that nearly often enough, and I really should. Yeah. With just putting little bits of world weirdness that the PCs don't know how to interpret it because you don't know how to interpret it. But later on down the line, there will be something. You don't know what it is, but at some point there will be something they meet that they don't know about. You'll be like, oh, yeah, it was the same thing. And it just makes you look real clever.
Yeah. And actually, I'll share this. We put the campaign on hiatus because it became really big for us and for some other players. But a while back, we put a campaign on hiatus and I was running it completely no prep and I was using random tables. And on a random table, several of the players rolled the same thing a number of times on one of my random tables, and it was a single gold coin laying in the road. And it just happened totally randomly. Well, when we get the opportunity to pick this campaign back up, that's going to lead to something, right? Like that's going to lead to something and be like, why is there every once in a while a gold coin in the road? And, I don't know exactly what I'll do with that, but that's going to be something because the players, right? I already heard them talking about that. Like, why why every like 6 miles as we're traveling do we find a gold coin? Now, to me, it's just because you happen to roll a 17 on my table, which is improbable, but it happens, you know. But now I'm going to make that, you know, something happens. Like there is, you know, I don't know, maybe a traveling troupe of performers, but they're actually assassins, and their calling coin is a, you know, or their calling coin. I did a slip there. Their calling card is a coin, right? So they're leaving a coin behind and letting that. And if, you know, my players were from this area, they would know, you got to watch out. Here comes this group again, or whatever it is, right? Like I'm just going to make up something at some point, and it's going to, even though I'm no prepping, it's going to seem for my players like, unless they listen to this episode, I guess it's going to see, you know, it's going to seem like that I prepped the whole way.
Yeah, that is super cool. That is enormously fun.
Yeah. And so I do that a lot. And then, like I said, I also try to do, I love your term backshadowing. I might write that, and I might steal that and write that in a blog post or something like that, because that's pretty good. But yeah, you make sure that the something always has a backstory, even if you're making it up on the spot, or you say, hey guys, let's take 5. I got to run to the bathroom or whatever. And you just like, oh my gosh, I need a whole backstory for this army that just invaded. You know, give me a backstory. What did I read last night? Or what movie did I see? Can I steal something, you know, from that? Or what did I read on Molten Sulfur blog that I could steal out of here and make this a backstory, you know, real quick. And that's usually kind of the stuff that I do.
Yeah, I love it. I'm sold.
Yeah. All right. So we talked a lot about that, and I know we are going along again on another long episode, but we had one other one, a Pilgrimage of the Dead. And I think we're heading back to France, aren't we?
Yeah. We're heading back to France, this time around 1320. Out of curiosity, so I did not notice when we started this, where are we at time-wise?
Well, actually, we might be doing okay. We're about an hour, or maybe 50 minutes or so.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. All right. Well, in that case, all right. Shake the nerves out. And so
like an 8-minute Pilgrimage of the Dead.
An 8-minute Pilgrimage of the Dead. So that then it gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the source here, because honestly, I wrote this blog post just as an excuse to be able to talk about the historical source that it is drawn from, because it is wild. So in the Middle Ages, there were a number of religious beliefs in Europe that the Catholic Church considered heresies. And one of the most popular of them was a belief called Catharism. And Cathars considered themselves Christians. They, believed in Christ and the resurrection and all that good stuff. But they had a bunch of beliefs that were outside what the Catholic Church considered acceptable. For example, they believed that there was not one God, but two. That they were two roughly co-equal gods, that the good God made heaven and souls and all of the good stuff, and that the bad God made the world and bodies and all of the bad stuff. And so what that meant for us is that we were souls, good souls, fundamentally good souls, trapped, unfortunately, in inherently sinful bodies, in a world of suffering, and it's intentionally a world of suffering because it was made by the evil God. And they also believed that they believed in rebirth, in reincarnation. They believed that we were trapped, that humans were trapped in an endless cycle of rebirth and suffering. And the only way for these fundamentally good souls to escape from this suffering was through, appropriately enough, Cathar religious rituals, right? Ain't that always the way? Yeah. And they were led by these people called perfects. Perfects underwent a religious ritual called the consolamentum. The Catholic Church called it hereticization. And by undergoing the consolamentum, you were freed of sin. All the sin was stripped from your body in a way not inconsistent with the way Catholics felt and continue to feel about baptism. But, for the Cathars, consolamentum is real and baptism isn't. And then you have to stay sinless, of course. And so in order to stay sinless, the Cathar perfects, they couldn't get married, they couldn't have sex, they couldn't eat meat. Like, there was a bunch of stuff they could not do. And for Cathar lay people, of course, like, that's a lot of restrictions, right? You can't get married, you can't have kids, meat isn't, strictly speaking, 100% necessary in the Middle Ages, but boy, it makes your life less miserable. And so being a perfect was kind of out of reach for most Cathars. But if you underwent the consolamentum on your deathbed, and then you refused food and water so that you, even if the sickness you were dying of didn't get you, starvation got you, you would die sinless. In whether, and if you die sinless, whether you are a lay Cathar or you are a perfect, you get to escape the endless cycle of rebirth. Anyway, Catholic Church didn't like this very much. They launched a crusade, the so-called Albigensian Crusade, killed tens of thousands of people, very bloody. Southern France, which was associated with Catharism, just awash in corpses as a result of all this. Loads of stuff. Fast forward from all that, the Cathars are pretty well exterminated, but there are still Cathar beliefs hanging on, especially in the countryside where the church doesn't have as much sway. And so the Catholic Church establishes an inquisition to root out heretics, to root out Cathar beliefs. And for the most part, yes, this inquisition was also concerned with finding the last Cathar perfects, because there were a handful of Cathar perfects still hiding out in caves in the Pyrenees Mountains. The last Cathar perfect was believed to have been burned by the Inquisition in 1320. But mostly the Inquisition is concerned with lay people who have beliefs that are uncomfortably Cathar and not nearly as Catholic as they ought to be. And in 1317, after this Inquisition has been going on for about 100 years, we get a guy who takes over the Inquisition. And this guy is named Jacques Fournier. Hooray, we're back to French names. Bishop Fournier becomes the Bishop of Pamiers, which includes where the Cathar Inquisition is operating. Jacques Fournier, by the way, will later go on to become Pope Benedict XII, right? This is not the last time he will matter in history. But unlike previous bishops of Pamiers, Bishop Fournier takes a very active interest in the Inquisition. And the Inquisition is not being so active during this time period. It's really only worried if you report to a representative of the Inquisition, like, hey, I believe that my neighbor may believe that the world was not created but has always existed, the Inquisition will spring into action. But the Inquisition at this point really isn't so much like going into villages and making sure that everybody's on the up and up. Jacques Fournier kind of revitalizes the Inquisition, and he's present at most of its interrogations. I say interrogations, by the way, and I don't mean that euphemistically. I mean actual, like, hey, we're here. You're not being tortured. We're talking. And he's maintaining a document. He's maintaining a transcription of everything that's being said. It's not a perfect transcription. The people who are being hauled in to talk to the Inquisition are speaking Occitan. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, which is the local language. It is not French. And the transcription is a church document, so it is being maintained in Latin. So the cleric who is writing down what's happening is translating in his head from Occitan into Latin and then writing it down. But nonetheless, what this means is we have a document that has medieval peasants, real people, ordinary people, not kings, not knights, not bishops, ordinary people speaking in their own words and describing in their own terms what their lives are like, what they believe. And it's an incredible document. This is the document has come to be called the Fournier Register. And it's amazing because it's one of the oldest documents we have, at least in the Western world. I'm not nearly as smart about outside of Europe, but it is one of the oldest documents we have where normal people are speaking about themselves in their own voices. It's not a priest writing down on their behalf. It's not a count saying, oh, you'll never believe the stupid things that the peasants are doing now. It's them in their own words. And it's an incredible resource. Of course, as near as I can tell, very little of it has been translated into English. So I have to read it in the scraps that I can. I'm sorry. But because do I not speak Latin. But it's this incredible treasure trove. And you read it and you're like, oh my God, like I recognize you, right? Like you are my aunt, you are my uncle, you are my cousin. The concerns that you have are the concerns that my people have, right? Like we can recognize each other across the great gulf of history, the same way we can recognize the fundamental humanity of a foreigner gazing across the great gulf of distance, but we can't always recognize ourselves in the writings of the high and the mighty because their concerns are not the concerns of ordinary people like you and me. I love the Fournier Register is what I'm getting at. So I want to talk about one interrogation in particular. And again, I say interrogation. Bishop Fournier always asks, hey, by the way, have you been tortured? He wants to know. Have you been tortured? No, you haven't been tortured? Okay, write that down. He hasn't been tortured. Are you under arrest out of curiosity? And oftentimes the answer is no, I'm not under arrest. They made it real clear I was free to go whenever I wanted. Sometimes they are under arrest, unfortunately. As far as by modern standards, this is horrific, right? Like some of these people are going to be burned alive. Some of these people are going to be sent to jail for sentences that are relatively short, but medieval hygiene isn't great. And so they will die in prison after only a few months of disease. By medieval standards, this is an incredibly lenient thing, right? These people aren't being tortured. Many of them are free to go. In any case. So this interrogation of a man named Arnaud Guilly, also called Arnaud the Drunkard. And Arnaud is hauled in to speak to the Inquisition because he holds the heretical belief that he sees dead people, that he walks down the roads at night with the dead. And he is real clear, and the good bishop is asking him about all this, and Arnaud is real clear, like he does not mean that euphemistically. The dead are right there. He sees them. They have hands, they have feet, they have heads, like they look like you and me. And they're walking down the road and they're holding each other's hands as they walk in order to keep their spirits up. And some walk quickly and some walk slowly, and sometimes they stumble and are trodden upon by their fellow dead. And sometimes they stop in beautiful homes where coincidentally the landlord or the person who lives in these beautiful homes is always out, and they drink the fine wines they find in these beautiful homes. And okay, asks Bishop Fournier, like, Arnaud, why are the dead traveling? And they're only traveling at night, but why are they traveling? Oh, they're going on pilgrimage. They're traveling for the exact same reason the living travel. They go on pilgrimage for penance. These are all people who are mild to moderate sinners, and they are going on these pilgrimages to do penance for their sins. And once they have done the appropriate amount of penance, they go to a place that Arnaud calls repose to await the last judgment. And then Arnaud helpfully volunteers, by the way, did you know that on the last judgment, everybody's going to heaven, nobody's going to hell? And I know this. Arnaud the Drunkard, know this is true because a friend of mine told me, like, oh, who's your friend? Oh, he's one of the dead guys. His name is Hugues du Durfort. And Hugues has a special knowledge. The dead have special knowledge. And Hugues told me that everybody will go to heaven, that on the day of Last Judgment, the Virgin Mary will intercede on behalf of all of us sinners, and Christ will let everybody all the Christians into heaven. He'll even let all the Jews into heaven because Mary was a Jew, and she will intercede to her Jewish son, and they will say, okay, you were the wrong religion, but we'll still let you up. Neither Arnaud nor the late Hugues du Durfort volunteer any information about Saracens, pagans, or any of the other religions known to Christendom. I would not be surprised if Arnaud would definitely know about Islam because he's living on the slopes of the Pyrenees, and there is a lot of communication happening back and forth between what is technically not France and technically not Spain. But anyway, he does not volunteer any information about that. Bishop Fournier, by the way, not thrilled about this idea of universal salvation. He seems to find it offensive. But why would God create hell if he wasn't going to put anyone there? But I think it's amazing to see that some lay Christians have been predicting universal salvation literally as far back as we have records. And of course, this idea is contentious. This idea remains contentious among Christians today. It is super duper controversial. But literally as far back as we have the words of ordinary people, we have ordinary people saying, I don't necessarily believe that anybody's going to hell, which I just think as someone who finds Christian theology very interesting, I think that is in and of itself very interesting. But I digress. That's not particularly gameable. What's for me super gameable about all this is the adventure hook of this crowd of dead pilgrims. Got all these dead people walking down the road, right? Like,
I was wondering when you were going to get to the dead people. And the dead can have special knowledge. I feel like every single time I'm on your show, Matt, I talk about how I'm always looking for ways to provide my party with special knowledge, because you can't just keep sending them to another lost library to look for the one piece of information they need. Here's another way you can provide that information, right? They can get it from the dead. The dead are walking along on their pilgrimage. But only Arnaud can see the dead, right? And Arnaud isn't like, what do you mean you can't see them? Like, he knows. Why? If we want to talk to the dead, we got to be able to be like Arnaud. So how do we be like Arnaud? Special wine.
It could be the wine, right? He's Arnaud the drunkard. That's particularly useful if you are running a silly adventure or campaign, right? If you are running something that's lighthearted, then sure, the answer is booze, right? And then now we get to role play our characters getting drunk and going out to where Arnaud says the dead are. And, maybe we get to role play our characters getting up to some misadventures. But maybe you don't want to do it that way. And if you're running something, serious and sober, I would say you probably don't want to do the drunkenness thing, because it does tend to lend itself to silly play. So perhaps there's a particular contaminant in his drink. Maybe he always drinks from, this one vineyard, and that vineyard has a lot of this stuff in the soil, and it's that stuff that makes you be able to see the dead. But the wine is really bad, and so nobody else drinks enough of it to get to the point where they can see the dead. And so just, get that contaminant in your mouth, and you'll be able to see the dead. One thing, however, regardless of how it is that you decide that your fictionalized version of Arnaud, regardless of how it is that he can see the dead, I can tell you one thing for sure. That is that once you find your dead source and you get your information out of this dead person, the pilgrims will all vanish, leaving you alone in someone's beautiful private home, drinking their fine wine right before they get home and call the cops. Right? You got to do it that way. That has to be the cherry on top.
No, that would be a fun one. Yes. I mean, my first thought was they all turn and attack you.
Oh, yeah. Dead. You can also do it that way, though. Boy, that'd be pretty rude of them. Like, ooh, but you could do it with like, sure. Why wouldn't we tell you? You're not going to be able to live to do anything about it.
Exactly. No, I like that one. I like those both. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, that is a really, and I love what you said there. Maybe I'll steal that too, but a way to give secret knowledge to your players, or, give them better clues than just saying, yes, you have to research at the library. You have to go and talk to the mayor or something, giving them some other, giving that secret knowledge, some other delivery system besides some of those cliched ones, I think is incredible. And so this one is really good. And besides, The Pilgrimage of the Dead makes like an amazing novel title or a campaign title or movie title, cover. Whatever you're doing.
I will also mention the Fournier Register does provide an interesting template for a very specific kind of investigation. Like I said, the Fournier's Inquisition is horrific by modern standards. You've got people being hauled in because they might be the wrong religion, and if they don't pass the test, then they go to prison, or they have to wear a yellow cross stitched into their garments to shame them, or in very, very rare cases, it's unusual, very few people got executed, but in some very rare cases, or get burned alive. So, wildly unacceptable by modern standards, but by medieval standards, this is a humane way to conduct an interrogation. And so if you have something like this in your setting, maybe one day your fictional version of Bishop Fournier's out sick and somebody asks like, hey, can you guys step in? Can you ask the questions? And, can you tell the difference between somebody like Arnaud the drunkard who, okay, fine, he believes something he's not supposed to believe. He's not hurting anybody. Like, yeah, man, go say 12 Hail Marys. You're good. Or in real life, probably what happened to Arnaud is he probably had to wear a yellow cross stitched into his clothes and go on a couple of pilgrimages, ironically enough, with real living people, not with dead people. But can you tell the difference between people who have erred in whatever thing that your fictional Inquisition is designed to root out? Maybe it's a legitimately dangerous political belief. Maybe it's, demon worship or some nonsense. Can you tell the difference between somebody who has made some errors in that regard, but isn't trying to hurt anybody, and the one or two NPCs you go ahead and slip in there who legitimately actually mean harm to their neighbors? Can you tell the difference? Is it possible to tell the difference? Oh boy, do you want to run The Crucible, the role-playing game, right? Go read up on your Salem witch trials, and then run a session or two that's grappling, as we in America so often do, grappling with where are the ethical lines here? Life is often very difficult and complicated. I happen to think that difficult and complicated and moral dilemmas make for great role playing, but boy, do I recognize that's not everyone's bag.
Yeah. I want to hit it with my axe, right? There's always that percentage of people, right? But no, I think it's really cool. And of course you can do a lot with this, even though it is a fairly simple, premise that you can, like we've already talked about with the dead, we need to get secret knowledge from the dead. Of course, you can tease your players along by, planting maybe evidence that, the drunkard is, I'm just calling him that because I can't say his name, but the drunkard, is a charlatan, and people just think, oh, he just wants to break into rich people's houses and drink wine, and he's mostly harmless, but he's just telling this story, and then of course it's real. Or you just planned all of these little things to get them to be like, we're chasing the wrong thing here, or some different things like that. Or you could even use the play between, say, the bishop and the drunkard kind of thing. This to, where the bishop tells them, oh, the guy's just crazy, and we just let him alone. Nothing supernatural there. He's a harmless drunk, and we just let him. And you plant that evidence to give the players some even more conflict until, finally, yes, they decide to drink the special wine or something and see what is going on there. So I think there's just a ton of ways you can play with that right there.
Yes. As always, I would caution about red herrings in RPGs. Yeah. It's been my experience that players usually generate plenty of red herrings on their own. You don't often need to help them with that. They're little bitty red herring generators running independently. But
very true.
As everything, you got to know your players, right? And if you have a play group where they are focused, they are disciplined, they don't get sidetracked, then yeah, man, throw some red herrings in there. Make their lives complicated.
Yeah. Focus, discipline, play group, said no one ever, right? I think that one there. No, you're absolutely right. But, or you could just use the ones they give you, right? That's what you always do.
Yes.
So they're like, no, it's probably fake. He's probably just a drunkard. And then you lean into that a little bit for a little while. And then, you can kind of, spin them along if you're having fun, But yeah, Tristan, so we've talked for a long time yet again.
Once again.
Yes. And so we got tons of hooks and tons of advice for people. If I think I've said this before, but after listening to an episode like this, if you don't have some situations that you can use tonight in your game, I don't know what you were doing while you were listening to this podcast, but you weren't paying attention because we dropped a lot of stuff and we covered some really cool situations there you can use in your game. So Tristan, just remind everybody, what's your website?
So you can find me at moltensulfur.com, and don't forget about Shanty Hunters. If Shanty Hunters sounds like your bag, moltensulfur.com/shanty-hunters. Both of those links will be in the show notes.
Yep. And I will place those in the show notes so you can head over to dicegeeks.com. If you're listening right now, you can just head over there and find those links and check out Tristan's site and his new upcoming game. So once again, Tristan, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's always a delight, Matt.
All right, there you have it, guys. Oh my gosh. Tristan and I could go on forever about history and gameable hooks. I hope you really enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun talking to him again. If you are running a campaign right now and you need something to put into your game, please consider some of the things that we talked about today. Also, Tristan has been on the show a number of times before. We have discussed many different historical topics and situations that you can use in your games right now. Also, as we mentioned in the episode, please head over to dicegeeks.com. Check out the show notes for this episode so you can learn more about Tristan's website and his new upcoming role-playing game. All right, guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on here at Dice Geeks. Now, guys, if you really enjoy this show, please consider rating, subscribing, reviewing, liking, or whatever your podcast player of choice allows you to do to show that you like my show. Those things take you only just a couple of seconds, and they really help the show immensely. So I would appreciate it if you could do one or more of those things. Also, if you just love my show and want to make sure that I keep making these episodes, consider supporting the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. I thank you so much for listening, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming.